I may end up starting to use the Zoom technology that Euron is using, because I know that this has been having some trouble with the sound, with it peaking and everything like that. But for now, we're going to try this. Let me know how it is if you're on. Got one person on. Tell me how the sound is, if it's peaking too high. About 30 seconds till showtime. Are you hearing it, John? Sorry. I shouldn't talk over my intro music, but I am. Good afternoon, everyone. This is the February 21st, 2018 edition of Don't Let It Go Unheard. And today we're back to discussing news, politics, culture from an individualist perspective. We have finished our sort of soiree into Jordan Peterson. Although today's title, the title of today's show, is inspired by a rule of Jordan Peterson. So we haven't quite fully left the Jordan Peterson realm yet. I called it today, or at least don't lie. That's the second half of his Rule 8. His Rule 8 says, tell the truth, or at least don't lie. And the reason I did that is because as I was diving back into the news, I was overwhelmed by the amount of dishonesty, just so much news about lying and corruption. I've got a huge list. If you go to my blog at don'tletitgo.com, you will see the list, the program notes of all of these stories that I have to talk about with you. I hope you have a strong stomach on you. Maybe you want some coffee. I don't know, whatever it is afterwards. Maybe you'll need a drink after the show. Who knows, to handle all of this news. But hello, everyone. Looks like most people are listening over on Facebook if you're listening live. If you're over at Blog Talk Radio, or I mean, even if you're at Facebook, you can call on the number. Why don't I go ahead and put the studio number into the Facebook Live comments here. So I'm going to give you the Blog Talk studio number, 760-888-5817, if you want to call in, and maybe you have another story to share about corruption. I know that when I posted the show, somebody had one that they wanted to share as well. I think it was related to one of the stories that I have at the blog. So as I said, go to the blog, don'tletitgo.com, and you will see all of the stories. But first up in the program notes, of course, I've got embedded the YouTube player for the show that I did with Euron this past weekend. It's episode 1 of what we are calling, maybe Euron is calling it reluctantly, but I'm liking it. It's called None of the Above. And we've even done social proof, right? We've established social proof because I've gone over to Twitter and I did a poll that I put up for 3 days. I gave people 3 days to vote on this title. And it turned out that a super majority were in favor of keeping the title None of the Above. What's the complaint about? The complaint is that it's negative, really in the sense that I take it, to mean primarily, though. I don't really think it's negative. It's saying that, and if you see the Raphael painting School of Athens, there's Plato and Aristotle, and they're walking, and Plato is pointing up to the superior dimension, and Aristotle's got his hand out flat. He's saying, no, this is the world that we live in. This is where everything happens. And that is what you mean. There's none of the above. Aristotle rejects the idea of a superior dimension that Plato is saying, this world is just a pale reflection of the world of the forms. You could get even in more detail. It's just a pale reflection of models of things that aren't even in the world. I mean, it's crazy with Plato how far removed we are from the ideal. But in the Duran Duran song, None of the Above, Simon Le Bon roundly rejects holy roads, as he calls it, the idea of a superior dimension. What I wanted to add for the title of that show is the idea that there is nothing above the individual. So it's not just that you reject a superior dimension, some sort of religious dimension, but you also reject any sort of collective that is above the individual, any sort of a group or collective, whether it's based on race or identity or any race, sexual orientation, religious, anything else. You put anything above the individual, no, we are rejecting that. We will have none of the above, nothing above the individual. There were some people who were trying to say, okay, well, if we want to make it positive, we also want to make it similarly catchy, because none of the above is also catchy. It's got that virtue. Someone on Twitter was saying, how about all of the above, in the sense of the things that are above everything else? Oh, no, above all else, I think is what they want. Yeah, they want to say above all else. And above all else was going to be reality and reason and other things. And I didn't think of a response really to that. I didn't like it particularly. I mean, you know how you just have that sense of something is catchy to you, it appeals to you, or it doesn't. It just didn't appeal to me above all else. Maybe above all else, there are certain titles that I was thinking of that were really catchy and cool, but were too intimidating. Like you felt you'd have a hard time living up to it. So, for example, the original title that Ayn Rand had for We the Living was Airtight. And she was conveying by airtight the idea that a collectivist regime, a tyrannical, collectivist, totalitarian regime would be suffocating and strangling the people living inside. So it's, airtight. And the other connotation, of course, of airtight is that you have an airtight argument. And that was the sense in which I thought airtight would be really hard to live up to. It's kind of a cool title, though. So there's that one that I was thinking of. Another one I thought of was Think Twice. Think Twice could actually be kind of cool, because Think Twice is a little bit off the beaten path, but it's another way to say check your premises, which is very common in objectivism. It's a very valuable thing to say in objectivism, but if you called the show Check Your Premises, it would just be too cliche. So Think Twice might be cool. And I also like it because you have two people who are talking, and so in Peterson's idea, you'd be both of you thinking. So I've done some due diligence. I actually ran Think Twice by your own, because I didn't find that so intimidating. Yeah, we're thinking aloud, we're talking. It's not like I'm promising to deliver an airtight argument. So I ran that by him as well. I just, none of the above just seems like the one, and I really like that idea. It's like nothing. Yeah, so someone in the chat here is saying that they're liking Thinking Twice. I like Think Twice. I do like Think Twice, and maybe I'll run that by you on again. By the way, so I love doing that show. Obviously, I was having a great time, and I think everybody could tell I was having so much fun doing that with him. And he says, okay, well, we have, we're going to do the second one this Saturday, but you have to do it at 8 a.m. Pacific time. So imagine it's 11 a.m. Pacific time, and then you're jumping to 8 a.m. this coming week. But of course, I'm going to do it. Why? Because I love doing it. So I will be here. It's going to be 11 a.m. Eastern time, 8 a.m. Pacific time. We'll do the second show, and maybe I'll run that title by him and see what he thinks as well. But then let me go back to, because I'm losing the train of thought, the above all else, right? Someone had suggested the title Above All Else, and I think philosophically the reason I don't like it is because I don't want to talk about having something above anything else. There's existence, and then there's us trying to live the best life that we can in existence. And that's all there is. So you don't want to talk about up and down, levels and all this stuff. No, no, no. So none of the above just says it's here. It's like Aristotle in, and for the logo for my show uses a clip, a little inset from Raphael's School of Athens. My show, it's a little play on Aristotle kind of yelling at Plato, don't let it go unheard, right? But that painting just has so much in it, and one of the great things it has is Aristotle insisting this is the realm, this is where we are, let's just focus, don't talk about something being above anything else. So that's my gloss on it. I do really like this title. I would be interested to hear, I saw that at least somebody in the Facebook comments likes Think Twice. The none of the above lyrics, Josh says, aren't very good. Yeah, I'm going to need to circle back to Euron because he mentioned something on his show yesterday about, oh, maybe he'll like it better when he hears the song. And that particular song is not necessarily my favorite Duran Duran song. Maybe we could use some music from some part of, Duran Duran, but not necessarily a clip from that particular piece. So I love the title. I love the connotation, and I love what I'm, of course, taking some artistic license in a number of ways in using that title. And poor Simon Le Bon, what do you mean you're going to reject leftist politics using my song title? But that's what I'm doing. That's exactly what I'm doing. Jay in the chat room here, or not the chat room, I'm over at Facebook in the comments. He says, none of the above, while negative oriented, is definitely more catchy and likely to attract the rising market of disaffected people. I would think so. I mean, there are so many people who just say, of all the options that were being given out there, none of the above. And for us, now libertarianism is being taken seriously as a third option, and to even say that's one of the things that we are not, right? That we're not libertarians. So there's so many reasons that I like it. Anyway, I digress. If you haven't watched the show, just watch the show. I think it's just so much fun. I have that fun going back and forth with Huron. And I would say probably, I haven't heard from him. I think he's nice and he won't tell me, but I'm sure he's gotten complaints. We just want to hear you, Huron. Why does you have this Amy woman in there? And then some people have told me, oh, well, you don't talk enough. You should talk more with. I thought it was exactly the right balance. It was the balance that I loved. I loved, because, I don't know if it's going to be this way every show, but, he actually was celebrating an anniversary this past weekend, and he said, hey, can you do more of the preparation? Sure, love it, prepare. And then I came in with different angles and then just sort of said, hey, here's this angle, you're on, go. And then, of course, interjected when I had something substantive to say every so often. Yes, and that I like that balance. It's great. I'm going to do whatever feels natural and comfortable to me, which was the balance that we had on that show. And so if you want to hear more of your own, he's got his own shows. And if you want to hear more of me, you got my shows. By the way, support me, Patreon, come over and subscribe at YouTube, all of that. The other kind of thing that I'm doing on my YouTube, and I'm starting to think, depending on the level of support I get at Patreon, that I might do this news type of show we're about to do, and then also do as a separate line of shows the sort of deep dive into books like I did with Jordan Peterson. Not sure yet, but this is something that I'm thinking of. So if you're interested in seeing both of those kind of shows from me, then definitely go over to Patreon and become a subscriber, a patron of mine. Josh over here on Facebook, he's saying that you asked him questions and he answered. It was kind of like interviewing him. Yeah, I was interviewing and then a bit of a discussion as well. So if I had something that was my particular thought to contribute and add in, and every so often I'd, add one little tweak to a thought that he was having, and it's live. So whatever I'm saying to him in that moment is something, if he was given all the time in the world, he might have thought of separately as well. But, this is live, and you're not going to think of every angle on a thought. So it's good to have two people going back and forth. But he's excellent, and I think the flow was just good. I think it was exactly perfect. Jason over here at Facebook says likes Think Twice or none of the above. Yeah, we'll see. For my show, people might be new to my show. Mine's called Don't Let It Go Unheard. And it is sounding sort of negative, right? Don't Let It Go Unheard. It's named after an essay by Ayn Rand called Don't Let It Go. And the it, and the thing you're not supposedly trying, you're trying not to let go, is the American sense of life, the uniquely American way of coming at the world, of looking at man's prospects for success and happiness in existence. That, and she identified that Americans came at life and had attitudes about their place in the world vis-a-vis government or in society, or just their ability to achieve success on this planet. Americans have a different attitude, she thought, about that than anything else. She wrote it in 71. And so one of the things that I have typically looked at in my show is, how is the American sense of life doing? She wrote in 71 and she had certain observations. Are we still doing well in all the different parameters that she identified? And so every so often we revisit that theme on my show. So as I said, that was a long intro. Go over to the blog, don'tletitgo.com. And this show typically runs about an hour and a half. So we've got an hour and 15 left to go. I've got a number of stories over there. All of them are on this theme of people lying, people being dishonest. And if we need to recapitulate a little bit what I mean by dishonest in terms of Ayn Rand's philosophy, which is the way in which I love to understand this virtue, the way that I think this virtue is properly understood, the virtue of honesty. The virtue of honesty says that you should never fake reality in order to obtain a value. Never fake reality in order to obtain a value. And that is a principle that, if you properly understand it and you unpack it in different contexts, can sometimes give some surprising answers. So, for example, this virtue is not primarily about your relationship to other people, whether or not you are telling the truth to other people. And what it's primarily about is your connection as a human being, your ability to perceive reality, to perceive the world that we live in. And the virtue is necessary for human life, Rand wrote, because we need to maintain this connection with reality. Our rational faculty, which is this faculty that we have by our nature, we have a certain type of consciousness, in according to which we have reason, we form concepts, we use our concepts to then form principles, and we guide our life by principles. Whether you know it or not, there are principles that you walk around living by all day long. This great faculty that we have that enables us to go to the moon, put blueberries in the grocery store, get on the air and broadcast live to you right now, all of the things that human beings can do to survive, all of those are made possible by this great faculty that we have. However, if our rational faculty, if our reason, if we let our consciousness get out of touch with reality, lose proper contact with reality, then we are not going to do well. We are not going to succeed in our life. We are not going to produce the values that we need to sustain ourselves. That is primarily what honesty is about for Ayn Rand. It is maintaining a connection, never faking reality in any way, shape, or form, primarily to yourself. Now, the stories that we have in the news are often about people lying to other people, being dishonest in various realms in order to supposedly obtain a value. But you might think, properly speaking, if you're a human being, that you can't really obtain anything that's truly of value, dishonestly. You can't do it. If you think, oh, well, I'm going to go ahead and get something and I'm going to get it by lying to this person, it's not going to end up being of value to you. You're going to know in your mind that you have been dishonest, and you're not going to be able to fully enjoy that value. Yaron had an excellent show. He did a whole deep dive on honesty recently, and he talked about Bernie Madoff, which he knows a lot about. He read a lot about Madoff and how Madoff suffered. You'd think, okay, well, Madoff, he got away with it for so long and he must have been doing well. And apparently, no, it was quite torture for him, and he felt relieved when he, finally ended up getting caught and being brought to justice. So, yes, a lot of the examples we'll talk about today. Honesty, though, is really about maintaining that contact between your consciousness and the world out there so that you can survive, so that you can do all the things you need to produce the values required to sustain human life in the real world. And Jordan Peterson, I'm not going to recapitulate much at all, but Jordan Peterson, in his chapter, when he's talking about this, he had an excellent metaphor. And he said that if you tell a lie, if there's some dishonesty, it's like putting a drop of sewage into a beautiful magnum of champagne. You can have the largest magnum of gorgeous champagne, and then if you put this drop of sewage in it, the entire thing is ruined. And he didn't necessarily intend that metaphor to apply only to the individual human consciousness, to one individual's rational faculty. He was talking about the corruption of society as large, because it is true that if individuals habitually are dishonest to themselves and to other people, that society at large is going to break down as well. And we're seeing all kinds of evidence of this in the stories. But I like to take that metaphor and just think about that, because you can kid yourself and you can say, oh, it's just the tiniest little drop of sewage and it's this huge magnum of gorgeous, wonderful champagne. But it's just not. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. So without further ado, let's get over to the stories. The first one comes via Sunny Lohman. Thank you, Sunny. Over at the Olympics in Korea, Russian curler tests positive for PEDs, some drug that I guess I should know about, at Winter Olympics per report. And another, I guess the other word for it is meldonium. Meldonium, hadn't heard of it before. Russian curling bronze medal winner Alexander, a name I can't pronounce at the end, I'm sorry. My Russian is not so good. I have a little Russian. I actually know a little bit of Russian, but it's not good. He's reportedly tested positive for a performance-enhancing drug. Oh, PED. Okay, performance-enhancing drug. See, I'm so out of it, I don't even know that acronym. The drug is called meldonium. If confirmed, it will be the first instance of an Olympic athlete from Russia testing positive for a banned substance at the Games. It comes in the wake of Russians already being barred from competing under the nation's flag due to widespread doping. The B sample that this athlete gave is expected to be tested on Monday. It will confirm if there's been any doping violation. The Russian officials are meeting with the International Olympic Committee to go over the findings before they are revealed. The athlete and his wife, Anastasia, and her last name is something else I cannot pronounce as well, they won the bronze medal against Norway on February 12th. The IOC has stated publicly that it may allow the Russian athletes to march under the country's flag in the closing ceremony, provided they adhere to the IOC standards, and we don't know if the positive test would affect that, etc. The drug is used widely throughout Russia and Eastern Europe, the same drug that tennis star Maria Sharapova tested positive for in 2016, and for that she had gotten a 2-year suspension, which had been eventually reduced. It's a metabolic modulator, apparently. It's prescribed as a short-term treatment for heart conditions, but was used for an extended period of time throughout sports until it was banned. The athlete told Russian officials he fears his drink was spiked with it while training in Japan leading up to the Games. Somebody slipped him this drug. Okay. The curler is reported to have said he suspects a teammate who was not selected for the Games. Okay, there you got a motive. Could have drugged him on purpose. Okay. I guess maybe we can find out. But could he ever prove that? And is that what you would do if you were a spurned teammate? Would you go ahead and spike with a performance-enhancing drug? I guess maybe. Then so here, suppose that this is true. I mean, you've got dishonesty in one way or the other, right? You have one person, in the Facebook comments, someone is saying, why would someone need help with curling, and that was Sunny's comment. Sunny said, "Why would someone need help with curling? It seems, kind of ridiculous that you need performance-enhancing drugs." So it could be that you're more likely to believe that this teammate who wasn't selected for the games actually did drug him on purpose just to get him disqualified, because it doesn't seem. This is the thing, though, right? Anything that requires focus, you could say maybe you want a performance enhancing drug. You think, okay, well, it's not really, a sport like other sports, but anything that requires any sort of performance and focus, you could say a performance. I mean, I've got my caffeine right here. Thank you, buttered coffee people, by the way. Sometimes I forget to sip this thing throughout the show, but it's sort of as a security blanket almost, right? I've got this cup of coffee that I can sip. It's warm. It's kind of cold in California right now, so warm up the fingers, right? Mm. But yeah, it's caffeine. Caffeine focus for my show. I like to do that. So, in any event, yeah. So this is the first. So suppose that he is taking these drugs. He's not allowed to take these performance enhancing drugs in order to do better. Then what is he doing? He is, showing up at a competition, not just any competition. He's showing up at the Olympics with the idea that he is a valid competitor in this sport against anybody else who's there. He's showing up and he wants to be judged on the merits, supposedly. But if he's done this knowingly, if he did it himself, he knows in his mind that he's not supposed to be taking these drugs, that he's not supposed to be evaluated on his performance with this performance enhancing drug. It's supposed to be without. And so, what does he hope to gain? I mean, if he really did it and he gained the medal, how could you enjoy? Every time you looked at that medal, you would know. You would know that you did it by cheating. It just wouldn't be of value. Anything about your performance that you would take pride in, you'd have that question mark. Could I have done it without this? Now, for me, like I said, half the time is, well, could I do my show without my coffee? Well, sometimes I don't even drink it. It's, like I said, security blanket. But maybe I need my coffee to even do a halfway decent show. So that's just the first story. Let's go. Get in here. So, second one. Oh, this is a fun one. So many of you guys are watching me on Facebook right now. Headline, New York Times, on social media, lax enforcement lets imposter accounts thrive. How many of you guys have gotten friend requests or other sorts of interactions from imposter accounts that you thought were imposters? And you can answer me over, of course, at the Blog Talk Radio chat room as well. As I said, feel free to call in. How many of you have gotten this type of request? I have of late gotten a number of friend requests from accounts that you just know are sham accounts. There's very little to them and it doesn't look genuine at all. There's some sort of a stink test that you can do when you look over a friend request and you can tell, is this an actual person? I don't know why. There's just been this huge rash of these lately. And the funniest thing that I got, on Facebook, you'll get something called a message request, and it's from somebody who is not a friend of yours on Facebook and so couldn't message you in the normal way, and so it comes through. Sometimes you'll get a notification that you've got this message request. So I go in there and it's a message request from somebody who is pretending to be a Facebook friend of mine with the same exact profile picture. Now, if you're not familiar with the Facebook mechanism, if you know, for example, that the message requests are going to come in only from people who are not your friends already on Facebook, if you don't know that, you'll click on that thing, you'll accept the request. Now, I don't know what the effect is of accepting a message request from somebody. They're just going to send you messages until you get sick of it and then you block them in Messenger. I don't know if accepting somebody as a contact in Messenger has any ramifications. I mean, you've seen viruses go through Messenger, but that means somebody has to send you something and then you have to click on it. So I don't know what that person thought that they were going to gain by posing as a friend of mine, But obviously I knew it's not going to come through as a message request and I went ahead and messaged the friend and said, hey, by the way, I got this. But yeah, so watch it out there. There are all these imposters. Now, what is going on with these imposter accounts? What is the end game for these? That's what the New York Times article is talking about. The article is also hinting that because the companies have what New York Times is calling lax enforcement of their rules about imposter accounts, that maybe there should be some sort of regulation. That's part of it. When Hillary Mason, a data scientist and entrepreneur, discovered that dozens of automated bot accounts have sprung up to impersonate her on Twitter, she immediately set out to stop them. So here's this woman. She finds out that there's these imposter accounts. She filed dozens of complaints with Twitter, repeatedly submitting copies of her driver's license to prove her identity. She reached out to friends who worked at the company, but days later, many of the fake accounts remained active, even though virtually identical ones had been shut down. So even though she's complaining, they're not being shut down. Continuing with the article. Millions of accounts impersonating real people roam social media platforms, promoting commercial products and celebrities, attacking political candidates, and sowing discord. They spread fake images and misinformation about the school shooting last week in Florida. They were central to Russian attempts to sway the 2016 presidential election in favor of Trump, according to a jury indictment on Friday. And American intelligence officials, believe they will figure in Russian efforts to shape the coming midterm elections, too. And then New York Times says, yet social media companies often fail to vigorously enforce their own policies against impersonation. Now, okay, first of all, watch out for the impersonation. And here are, again, all of these people, whoever is putting together these bots and these impersonating profiles, they think they're gaining some sort of value out of it. They can do this only insofar as they can fool people and trick people. So the people that they can sway and manipulate are the ones who are sort of the easily taken in by this. If they are going out there and spreading disinformation and misinformation, and then they're getting people to vote on the basis of misinformation, it's not like they're winning any real value in the world anyway. But do watch for these people. New York Times is calling out the social media companies on this, saying you need to enforce your own policy more strictly, and that's a valid criticism. I have no problem with New York Times calling them out and saying, hey, you've got this policy. There's a rash of just problems with people violating the policy. There are people who have been victims of these impersonations that have gone out there and even complained to the company and said, please take down this impersonating account. And still, we're getting examples of the company not doing it. So yeah, call them out. What I fear is that some of this is going to be used in the call to bring government regulations to bear on the social media companies. And that is something I do not want to see. I would much rather see the media companies help educate people, get people more savvy. The media companies get better at pursuing violations and shutting down violations of the policy. The article continues, Facebook and Twitter require proof of identity to shut down an imposter account, but none to set one up. And see, that's the other thing. The other thing they're pushing is that you should have to have a proof of identity to set up a social media account. And that would be bad because this is, one more step towards 1984, basically, lack of privacy. They say even as social media accounts evolve into something akin to virtual passports for shopping, political activity, and even gaining access to government services, technology companies have devised their own rules and standards with little oversight or regulation from Washington. Damn it. That's what they're saying. They want them to regulate. That's what they want. They want regulation. Now, what do they mean by even gaining access to government services? Apparently in Britain, the article that they have linked to is over from The Guardian. Facebook accounts could be used to prove identity to access public services. So that would, it's called the Cabinet Office, has confirmed that this is potentially potentially going to be the case in the UK. So yeah, you'd say, okay, if you're going to start allowing Facebook accounts to prove identity, then it would be good to have to prove identity in order to have a Facebook account. But I don't think you should have a social media account being used to prove identity to gain government services. This is just yet another consequence of even offering so-called government services in the first place. I'm sure all the services that they're going to talk about there are services that government shouldn't even be performing. So lots of imposter accounts. You're just in this sea of imposter accounts out there on social media. Lots of fake followers on pages. Lots of fake news, as they call it, spreading all sorts of false narratives out there on social media. And yeah, call the companies on it. Say, okay, crack down on them. At least crack down on them when you get the complaints with people showing you IDs and giving you proof that this other account is an imposter. That would be quite helpful. Don't bring in government. Comments over here. Oh, they're talking about curling. Yeah, what is the value that you gain by, for example, showing up at a competition doped and pretending as if you're not, because of course all the rules of the venue say that you shouldn't be when you show up there, that if you show up there you're in effect saying, I'm here as a valid competitor. What's the value to be gained there? Jay is saying the only value to be gained would be in the eyes of others. True selflessness, yes, definitely. Cobra is over here at the chat room at Blog Talk feeling lonely. Yes, everyone is over hanging out on Facebook. I guess the sound is good enough on Facebook too that people like to hang out over at the Facebook video. So let's go over to our next story. VA Chief Shulkin. He has been involved in a scandal recently. His job, and these are all headlines that I got within the last day or two, okay? All the headlines I'm giving you today are all headlines that I got within the last day or two. VA Chief Shulkin's job is safe, White House says, unless, quote, other stuff comes out. Other stuff comes out. White House officials have told Veterans Affairs Secretary David Shulkin that his job is safe, according to people familiar with the matter, who indicated Tuesday that President Trump decided to, quote, stomach the story about Shulkin's alleged misuse of taxpayer money during a 10-day trip to Europe. The president's decision was communicated to Shulkin by White House Chief of Staff John F. Kelly, according to an administration official who, like others interviewed, spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss the situation candidly. Trump, quote, personally likes Shulkin, the official said, cautioning, however, that, quote, if other stuff comes out, this could change, but for now he's safe. Does this tell you the kind of person we have in the White House, assuming this is true? Now, says White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders said Tuesday she has, quote, no reason to believe, end quote, Trump has lost confidence in Shulkin. Now, the report was from the Inspector General, and it accused the Secretary and his senior staff of misleading the VA's ethics office about aspects of his travel. Shulkin has disputed the findings, alleging in response that he and his associates have been the target of a coordinated effort by other Trump appointees to force him from the agency. So he is alleging, I guess, that the particular allegations are not true. So I guess as long as it's disputed by him, it's going to be okay. It would seem that before, because he's saying if other stuff comes out, this could change, but for now he's safe. So if something comes out, there's an allegation about somebody, all the person has to do is just dispute it, and that's it. And there doesn't have to be a full finding for Trump to say, oh, it's okay because he personally likes the guy. If you're on the premise that this guy actually did misuse government funds, right? First of all, we're forced to pay this money. It's not like we're donating. I'm going to talk about Oxfam in a minute. And with Oxfam, at least, you are voluntarily donating to Oxfam. But here, this money is taken from us against our will, it's on the premise that the government is doing things that are for our benefit, for the benefit of the entire country. And here he is potentially using those government funds to, I guess, have a nicer trip. Is that what he did? He, misused some of the funds during the trip. If he did that, it's a big deal. And, for Trump to ignore the drop of sewage in the magnum of champagne and decide, well, he personally likes Shulkin, so a drop of sewage in a magnum of champagne is no big deal. To me, that would be revealing, that he doesn't care. It's like, oh, tell a little lie here or there. It's not such a thing. I would be interested to know myself if he was misrepresenting the way that he used the funds to the VA's office. You'd want to know not just that. So it's not just about whether other stuff comes out. It's what is the actual truth of the matter with respect to these allegations. That's what I think a rational president would want to know. He's going to go ahead and stomach the story. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that he necessarily believes him, Shulkin, right? It's, just sort of that he's blasé about it. He doesn't really care whether it's true or false one way or the other. And to me, that is disturbing. Now, I've only gone into 3 of the stories so far. I've got many more. Here's another one. And maybe you don't necessarily think from the headline that this is another case of something dishonest. But if I give you the headline, some of you will get it right away. Venezuela launches virtual currency, hoping to resuscitate economy. Venezuela launches virtual currency, hoping to resuscitate economy. And this is Josh over here at Facebook. He says, looking forward to how Venezuela can innovate a way to inflate crypto. I mean, what's the need to inflate crypto? This is the thing that's so ridiculous, right? Venezuela is collapsing. So whatever currency has as its basis, right? Right now in the United States, the dollar has as its basis whatever the strength, the perceived strength is of the economy. And it's actually not the perceived strength, right? Right now, it could be floating. The dollar, the value of the dollar could be floating on the perceived strength of the economy. But in the long run, it's going to depend on people actually producing values that sustain human life in a sustainable way in the United States economy. Otherwise, the dollar will collapse. Why? We don't have a gold standard. There's nothing behind it except for the productivity of the American people. Venezuela is collapsing, and they, there's all sorts of sanctions and everything else, and they are in a bad way. They want to resuscitate their economy, and they think they can do it on one of these, sort of Bitcoin virtual currencies that don't have any particular thing tied to them at all. They have even less of a foundation than our dollar. Now, I don't want to get into a philosophical debate about Bitcoin being good or bad or anything else. The virtue of Bitcoin, of course, is that it's not regulated by government, and you could say it's got transparency, right? Because of the way that a Bitcoin is generated out there in the cyberspace and all the different computers working together to generate a Bitcoin, and then the trading is completely transparent out there because each Bitcoin has a certain unique identifying number and all those things, right? I know some of the math, but it's been a while. I don't know the math. I know of the math, so I have sort of this floating understanding of Bitcoin. So there is transparency to it. There's sort of collective knowledge of the Bitcoin. It's not objective in the sense of gold, right? It's not a gold standard. The gold itself has some value. There's just numbers running out there in the internet, and that's the Bitcoin. And the basis for it is that all the people who are participating, I guess, in trading the Bitcoins all treat them as if they have value, and they're willing to trade their work or their goods or anything else for other people's Bitcoins and vice versa. And As long as that all keeps going, everything's good, but you've seen, rapid fluctuations. So imagine there's Bitcoin. It's not based in any particular government. It's just free individuals out there trading it as freely as they possibly can, as long as governments around the world are going to let them do this. And then in this, realm of cryptocurrency, as they call it, virtual currency, you might say, a government, a failing government at that, is going to launch it and hope to resuscitate the economy as if there's some sort of valuable basis. Now, what are they going to say is behind it? I guess they're going to say that oil is behind it, because it says, in the article here, it's going to be backed by the nation's vast petroleum reserves. New digital currency, they had announced plans for it late last year. Response to a financial crisis marked by a profound devaluation of the national currency. Suffering, etc., etc. They hope that the sales of the digital currency known as the Petro will help its treasury pay off debt and increase imports of vitally needed goods, as well as raw materials for manufacturing. Supposedly it's going to allow investors to do an end run around sanctions imposed against their country by the Trump administration as well. Prediction, this is going to be nationalized in some way, unilaterally devalued by the Venezuelan government in some way, or otherwise disallowed or stopped by Trump or anybody else who is issuing the sanction. Over here in the Facebook comments, Josh is saying, but no property rights, but you own the oil. I mean, really, all you're going to be allowed is whatever the Venezuelan government decides at any given time your unit of cryptocurrency corresponds to with respect to oil. But I'm predicting that's going to change all the time. That I predict, people are going to rush in. Some people are going to do it because it's a feel-good thing. Some people are going to do it out of speculation, not realizing that this is exactly the sort of thing where they are playing into the hands of looters and socialists. And if you do rush into this, you're going to get what you deserve. And there's some great lines in Atlas Shrugged right along those lines. There's a lot of Atlas Shrugged in this story about Venezuela starting a cryptocurrency and getting everybody to invest on the basis of its vast petroleum reserves in Venezuela. How come those vast petroleum reserves haven't been able to save them and pay them yet? It's like, oh, well, if we sell these reserves, or we sell rights to these reserves on the market now, we don't have enough money to pay off all of our debt and feed our people and do all the things that need to be done. But if we just put it in a different currency, then suddenly we will. That there's something phony about that currency if that's the thinking, right? That it's just a different currency. All I have to do is trade my dollars to euros, and then suddenly I have enough money to make ends meet. No, it's not gonna work. If you don't have enough money, you don't have enough money. It's crazy stuff. Crazy stuff. Okay, so that's Venezuela. Yeah, so I predict disaster. Oh, and by the way, I first heard of this from Michelle Ray out on Twitter. She calls herself Galtz Girl on Twitter, and she is a user and big proponent of Bitcoin. And she immediately just said no. So even the people who think that Bitcoin, because there's a huge dispute, is Bitcoin a real money and everything else? So Michelle Ray is in favor of Bitcoin, but she knows that this just stinks. People used to say stinks to high heaven. I'll go ahead and use the phrase. I've got Rick following over along at Blog Talk. Hello, not Blog Talk, over at Facebook. Just says test. Yeah, Rick, it worked. You're there. Hello. Cobra over at the Blog Talk Radio chat room says, me on Facebook? Never. Okay, that's okay. But, obviously you can have comments here, and you can also call in if people want to call in, 760-888-5817. I have only begun to horrify you with dishonesty in my program notes. That was only number 4 on the list. Let's go on further. For the next one, I chose an angle on the story, because you know how these stories are released and then they develop over days. Yaron talked about this Oxfam scandal in yesterday's show. If you've been giving money to Oxfam thinking that it's going to Haiti, earthquake relief, and everything else, no, that's not happening. Instead, you apparently have been helping to pay sex workers. Good use of money, right? Um, they have an inquiry into sexual exploitation, downloading pornography, bully, and intimidation in Oxfam, gross misconduct. So, yeah, you are giving money to them thinking that they're using the money to actually relieve suffering from natural disasters, and instead they're using the money to have wild sex parties and everything else. The angle that I chose to go ahead and share with you in the program notes for today is that the Prime Minister of the UK, Theresa May, says the UK will not cut aid in the wake of Oxfam scandal. Just keep giving money to Oxfam. Now, if you listen to Yaron, he was saying that this scandal is not the reason to not donate money to Oxfam, that a lot of these organizations are not genuine in terms of relieving actual suffering in an emergency, that they are these self-perpetuating huge bureaucracies and only a small fraction ever gets there anyway. But imagine that even with a scandal, you have somebody who's supposedly one of the conservatives in the UK who will not cut aid even with this scandal. So, I mean, how many levels here? First of all, UK, they are taking money from citizens, and the idea is, it's just like here, the taxes are not voluntary, so they're taking money from their productive citizens. The premise is that the government is spending this money in a way that is to benefit the entire country, and instead they're giving it to Oxfam, which is just charity that people could have chosen to do on their own. Add an extra layer, which is that instead of doing charitable work, this organization has been shown to have not just some small drop of sewage in the huge magnum of champagne, but a big, huge dollop of that disgusting sewage. And nonetheless, no, don't cut aid. Keep giving them money. Why would you do this? This just shows, and this is the reason I chose this angle is because this is something also that Yaron was talking about last night. He was talking about Brexit and how the latest developments in how the UK is choosing to handle Brexit shows that it is not taking the opportunity that it has to relieve the regulatory burden in the UK, right? That getting out from under the EU gives the UK this huge opportunity to relieve itself of the regulatory burden, allow the producers within the UK to just go, take the reins off, unfettered progress and productivity. Wouldn't that be wonderful? But instead, no. A lot of the usual subsidies and regulations are staying in place, and it just shows that May, who they chose as the leader, who apparently is anti-Brexit, is showing she's anti-Brexit and anti the spirit of Brexit, which is, the idea of actually allowing people to be free and productive. That, the better impulse behind Brexit anyway is getting rid of that regulatory burden, getting rid of the centralized control of the EU, and there's all indication that it's not really going to happen, that they're not going to take advantage of this. And what we're going to end up with is only the worst, which is, as Yaron was mentioning again last night, part of Brexit is, throttling the flow of labor, goods and labor, the free flow of goods, labor, trade, everything else into the UK. So you're getting the worst of it, some of it because of xenophobia, and people who were in Yaron's comment section agreed with that assessment, that there's just a lot of xenophobia behind the Brexit movement in the UK. Not everybody. Some people are actually for freedom in the UK, but there are a number of people who are for that. So you're not going to get the freedom, and you are going to get the xenophobia, and you're going to make it harder to hire qualified employees and everything else, harder to import goods that you want, make everything more expensive, less plentiful. It's really sad. So why did I include this angle then? Because you're doing that if you are regulating, if you are throttling businesses under the weight of huge amounts of regulation, you're doing this out of an altruistic motive, on the idea that businessmen cannot be trusted to act in a way that is honest and forthright, and just, that they are offering values that everybody is free to take on face value, on the market, everything else. Instead, you have to clamp down on them with regulations. In some cases, there are subsidies and price controls that they're keeping in place. Those are clearly even more altruistic, transparently altruistic in motive. And May is showing herself here. The put others above self, put sacrifice above everything else. And it's very consistent with that motive, this motive of altruism, to say, yes, particularly when this organization has shown itself to be untrustworthy, full of misconduct, rights violations potentially even in some of this, but certainly fraud, and I'll talk about one more aspect of it in a second. But this is dirty. This is really gross and revulsifying conduct that an organization that purports to be so moral, to be relieving suffering, people who are suffering through no fault of their own, that it's caught in this disgusting scandal where it is arguably, demeaning some of the very people that it's supposed to be helping, right? Through all of the sex workers and everything else, it's demeaning them as well. Nonetheless, give them money. Show forgiveness. Reward the people who are morally inferior and bad, and have shown themselves to have committed sin. That's exactly what she's acting in consonance with. This is exactly the sort of thing that an altruist would do. So there's your angle there, your Brexit angle. But yeah, so on the one hand, the government is supposed to be spending the money that it steals from you for your own good, for the country's good. It's not even doing that. It is throwing it at an organization that has shown itself completely unworthy even of charitable donations. And she's going to do that. Now, if you go into the Oxfam, the scandal itself more deeply, then of course you have a couple levels of dishonesty there. The first is that Oxfam is representing itself as taking donations from contributors and using them for disaster relief, when instead they're using it to have these crazy, wild sex parties. So there's that. Yes, faking reality in order to supposedly obtain a value. But then suppose even that they weren't misappropriating the money. Suppose it was, they worked hard doing the disaster relief out there, and all they did is, when they got their salary that they worked hard to earn, and they didn't get paid too much, it wasn't inflated, anything else. Suppose they went out and then they spent that money to have these sex parties or whatever and hire sex workers. So then you'd say, okay, they're being dishonest in that realm as well, because what are they doing? And you'd have to dive in more to the objectivist view of sex on this, but it's not like the sex that you have at a sex party is going to be a real value to somebody who is rational, who is engaging in sex for the proper purpose. So you have dishonesty at that level as well. So they're taking your money, your charitable donation. They tell you that they're going out there engaging in disaster relief. Instead, they've been shown to actually misappropriate the charitable funds and spend it on the sex parties. But even if they were spending their own money on the sex parties, they would be faking reality in order to supposedly obtain a value, whatever, what the proper value is that you would get from sex, the celebration of life and of productivity. They cannot get that because they're out there buying it from these Haitians for really cheap or something. They're exploiting So it's just disgusting on so many levels. It's really horrifying. And that is only the fifth story. We have more dishonesty. And I'm almost at the 1 o'clock hour, so I'm going to have to actually go through these at a little faster clip. What have I got going over in the... I've got Terrence, live by Terrence Network, first time listener over at Blog Talk. Welcome to the show. And over on Facebook, it's funny, people commenting on my regular Facebook posts on Facebook while I'm live, as if I can read that. I can't. Come over, listen to the show. One is just a moral issue, not a fraud, says Josh. So you're saying that the sex issue is just a moral issue, not a fraud. You're defrauding yourself, though, right? You're defrauding yourself. And again, honesty is about primarily honesty to yourself. So if you think you're going to get the value that you're supposed to be getting from sex in that way, then no, you're defrauding yourself. It is a fraud. It's definitely a fraud. It's just another layer of it. John over at Facebook says the Clintons stole most of the Haiti relief. Apparently there was enough left for some parties. Enough left for some wild sex parties at Oxfam. I'm sure that they're very appetizing people too. Okay, enough about that. Elizabeth Warren. Oh, okay, Josh is arguing back in. He says, that is a stretch, but okay, it's not a legal issue. So, it's funny, I'm an attorney, Josh, but I'm not concerned primarily with legal issues. It's funny because what you say about the legal issue, what's coming to my mind is a lyric from Election Day, which is a song from Arcadia, which is a spin-off group from Duran Duran, and I've put Election Day in the program notes for today's show. There's a lyric in Election Day, and it says, "Are you aware you're being illegal? It's making your savior behavior look evil," which is just a cute and clever lyric, but I think that's not, actually true. Sometime I might try to teach an online philosophy of law class, but in my philosophy of law seminars that I taught in academia for a long time, someone says, don't talk about Duran Duran. I'm not. I'm going to go into this issue of legal versus moral. In a philosophy of law class, one of the things you talk about is whether there is what you call a prima facie duty to obey the law. Jay goes, Duran Duran again, he votes. Go to my blog. You can get your Arcadia song at the end of the program notes for today. But yeah, I am always going to think of a song lyric and bring it in if I can. Okay, so the question is there a prima facie duty to obey the law? And that is a very highfalutin way of asking the question, but let me just ask you the question in the way that it could come up in a conversation with us. If I come in and I say, I broke a law today, I broke a law today. I'm so sorry, I broke the law. Would you automatically think, Amy, you are bad? Would you say, oh God, I now think less of Amy simply because I told you I broke a law today, would you? Or would you require more? Would you require that I tell you more? That's really the way to ask this question. And if you say no, that I understand the difference between something being legal versus moral, and that sometimes things that are illegal wouldn't necessarily, Josh says, no, Amy can do no wrong. I can definitely do some wrong. Okay, I've made my share of mistakes in life, but I submit, especially when we're in the era where somebody can write a book and say 9 felonies a day, or I forget what the title of the book is, but I have a Facebook friend, Adam Reed, who talked about that book, I think, that the average person goes around committing 9 felonies a day, then no. If I tell you I've broken a law, then you'd want to know, it's, what is the law? I don't know if I'm going to think badly of you, and, if you think you're immoral, Amy, without knowing more about this. So that's the way that the question comes up. when you say is there a prima facie duty to obey the law, what that means is, apart from anything else, if all you know is that there's something that the law requires of you, if you don't know anything about the moral content of it or anything else, do you have a duty, a moral duty to obey that law? And there's an excellent philosopher, and his name is escaping me now. Um, I'm going to have to look it up because I want to give the person credit at some point. But he goes through all of these arguments, these possible arguments for this prima facie duty, and says, no, you cannot say that on its face, simply because something is a law, you have a moral duty to do it. And then, of course, the consequence is that if I tell you I broke the law, that you wouldn't say, oh God, Amy, you're a terrible person, unless you knew more. What law was it that I broke? So if I said, okay, I drove 2 miles per hour over the speed limit on the freeway when I was coming back from the dentist. I just had to go to the dentist, by the way. Actually, it turned out to be a good visit, but I was not eager to go. But yeah, 2 miles an hour, you'd say no. And in fact, morally, you might say it's required to sometimes go faster than the speed limit depending on how the traffic is moving. If the traffic all around you is going 10 miles over the speed limit and you're going to go below the speed limit, that would be terrible. Lee over here at Facebook says, if someone I know to be a moral person says they have broken the law, I assume first that it's an issue with the law, right? That's what a lot of people will rationally think. That's what they'll do. So going back to the lyric, right? Are you aware you're being illegal? It's making your savior behavior look evil. I disagree with that lyric, because the mere fact that somebody is being illegal to me doesn't mean that they are behaving immorally. There has to be more to it. You have to tell me the content of the law. The mere fact that something is a law doesn't, to me, mean that you have any kind of moral obligation to, to adhere to it. Let me take a sip of something. I don't take a sip enough. I actually don't know how Yaron does it, because Yaron, he'll do shows for 2 hours, and I don't think I see him take a sip of anything. Oh, no, he takes breaks, doesn't he? Yeah, he does. He takes breaks. Sometimes he'll do a little commercial break and stuff. He must take a sip then. Maybe I just didn't see him do it. So, going back to Josh's comment over at Facebook. Josh says he's not concerned about the sex party so much because the issue is that whether it's legal or not, is there some sort of legal fraud? And I guess sex work is legal in Haiti, and so, okay. It is fraud that they're spending the money on it, but the thing that I'm worried about from, talking there about the dishonesty peg, I'm not worried about the legal status of what they're doing. I'm worried about people trying to fake reality in order to obtain a value. And as I've discussed at the beginning, the thing that you think you're obtaining, you think it's going to be a value, but really it ends up not being a value. The reality that they're faking is that they're having real sex that means something, and they're not. It is phony. And yeah, that is dishonest. They're being dishonest to themselves if they think that they're getting all of that. Robert in the chat room, or not chat room, sorry, I keep getting confused. In the comments over here at Facebook, Robert says, bad example, if all the traffic around you drove off of a cliff, do you do it too? No. But you would when you are trying to get out of everybody driving together off of a cliff, which, it feels like sometimes that's what we're doing in our society today, right? Everyone around you is insisting on, let's all drive over a cliff. So when you are figuring out how to get out of that pickle, you have to take into account the speed at which everybody around you is moving, the velocity and the direction, right? The velocity vector of everybody around you. You're going to have to take that into account if you're going to be safe. And if you're going to be moral, you're going to be safe. So